At 7:42 p.m., on a chilly October 1978 evening, the Andersons sat down for meatloaf in their suburban home off Elm Street. A shrill ring pierced the calm. Martha Anderson reached for the receiver, her slender fingers trembling against the ivory handset. "Hello," she whispered, expecting Aunt Clara but receiving only static and faint sobbing. Across the table, George Anderson paused mid-forkful, eyes narrowing as the mystery click of darkness filled his ears. Their daughter, 12-year-old Annie, scooted her chair back, knees scraping the linoleum floor, and stared in alarm. "Mom, what is it?" she asked before a low, distorted voice crackled. "Help us, please." The line fell silent, leaving a haunted hollow that swept through the kitchen like a cold wind. Plates clattered as George leaped up, chair scraping. "Martha, hang up," he urged, but her hand lingered, ear pressed against the receiver. In that frozen heartbeat, the normal and the nightmare merged, yanking the family into an abyss they could never escape. George Anderson grabbed the handset, pressing it to his ear with a trembling forearm as he dialed the rotary base again, his knuckles whitening with each whirring turn. Martha hovered behind him, heart thudding like a trapped bird's wings, shadows flickering across her floral apron. "Call the police," Martha urged, voice cracking with fear, as the cord rattled in George's grip. He pulled the handset free and dialed again, the clicking numbers dragging seconds into eternity before a crisp female voice responded. 911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked with practiced calm. George swallowed against the lump in his throat and said, "We received a call. It was just static, and someone crying, 'Help us, please.'" Then silence. A sick hush followed, broken only by Annie's quiet gasp as she wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. "Mama, what's happening?" the 12-year-old whispered, voice trembling. Martha knelt and pressed a kiss to Annie's forehead. "I don't know," she admitted, sounding so small. Outside, wind gusted around the house, rattling the old oak's branches against the windowpane. The wallpaper's pale flowers danced in the dim light, mocking the family's panic. Plates of half-eaten meatloaf sat abandoned on the table, steam long gone, as dread settled like cold ash in the room. Through the grim kitchen window, George caught the flash of red and blue strobes as a patrol car screeched to a halt on their gravel driveway. He bolted from the table, stumbling over the rug, and flung open the door to reveal Officer Ramirez, uniform crisp, flashlight beam dancing across the porch. "Is everything all right?" she asked, voice taut with concern. George's lips parted, but only a strangled gasp emerged as he held up the receiver. Martha and Annie appeared behind him, faces pale silhouettes in the doorway. The fluorescent bulb overhead flickered once, casting a spectral glow over the untouched meatloaf. Ramirez's radio crackled with distant static as she moved deeper inside, scanning every surface. Annie clutched Martha's hand, knuckles whitening. "Mama, I want to call Grandma," she said, voice quivering. Martha swallowed hard and whispered, "Not now, honey." Ramirez set down her radio and squinted at the silent phone on the table, its coiled cord still pulsing with emotion. Outside, wind flicked at the porch light, casting jittery shadows that skittered across the Andersons' anxious faces, sealing the moment in unsettling stillness. Officer Ramirez crouched beside the kitchen table and lifted the handset, inspecting its curved ivory surface as if searching for answers in its smooth contours. She held it at eye level, flicking her flashlight over the cord's coils, then spoke in quiet tones. "I'm not seeing an incoming line here," she said, voice low. George stepped forward, shoulders hunched. "How is that possible?" he asked, voice tight with confusion. Ramirez shook her head, glancing at the silent rotary dial. Martha pressed a hand to her mouth, and Annie shrank back, hugging her mother's leg. Ramirez rose, pocketing her notebook and radio with decisive calm. "Stay here and wait," she instructed, her boots clicking as she crossed to the door, leaving the family huddled in the silver-orange glow of the overhead light. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windowpane like fingernails on glass. In the brief hush that followed, the phone's cord seemed to pulse, as though echoing the family's mounting panic. George exhaled sharply and said, "Well, be right here," though neither of them truly believed it. Within moments of Ramirez stepping outside, the Andersons gathered in the living room, eyes locked on the hallway leading back to the kitchen. George leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Martha perched on the edge of the floral couch, with Annie pressed beside her, both faces pale under the single flickering lamp. Outside, the wind howled through the oak's branches, sending hollow echoes across the wood floors. An oppressive silence settled, broken only by the distant chirp of the police radio. Suddenly, the rotary phone in the kitchen rang again, its shrill tones slicing through the quiet. Annie's hand shot to her ear, but Martha placed a firm palm on her daughter's elbow and whispered, "Don't answer." George's jaw clenched as the ringing continued, relentless. "It can't be," he muttered, voice trembling. The lamp above flickered and dimmed, casting leaping shadows of the family onto the wallpaper. The sound of the phone echoed in their chests as time stretched unbearably. Annie whimpered, and Martha squeezed her hand. No one moved, frozen by fear as the screen cuts to black on that piercing ring. Late at night in a cramped attic office, Annie Anderson sat hunched over scattered case files under a single tungsten lamp. Wow! Her silver-streaked hair framed a face etched with decades of silent sorrow and unyielding resolve. Photographs of her missing family lay strewn across the desk like ghosts pleading for recognition. Annie's fingers traced the worn edges of a 1978 snapshot showing her parents' smiling faces. Each time she looked, the ache in her chest tightened as memories bled between past and present. A faded newspaper clipping dated October 12, 1978 stared back, its headline haunting her nightly thoughts. She pressed a trembling thumb against the printed letters, willing them to yield new clues. Every unanswered question burned through her dreams and drove her every waking moment. Tonight, she vowed, would be another step toward the truth, no matter how painful. Outside, rain tapped against the attic window, rhythmic and cold, echoing her lonely vigil. Early next morning, Annie retrieved a leather-bound family album from a dusty shelf in her hallway closet. She opened it to a page showing a golden autumn evening, her 12-year-old self standing between her parents. In that photograph, her mother's laugh sparkled, and her father's arm rested protectively around her shoulder. Annie stared at the image until the edges blurred, tears rolling down creased cheeks. The memory of that dinner table, frozen in time, felt like a door slammed shut on her childhood. She flipped the page to a black and white snapshot of their car parked by the riverbank, water lapping at its tires. Each turn of the page echoed in the silent house, as if the album were breathing with hidden secrets. Annie closed her eyes and pressed the photo to her lips, whispering, "I promise I will find you." Her voice trembled, but held an unwavering steel underneath. The album fell shut with a soft thud that reverberated through her empty home. By midday, Annie sat at a polished oak desk in the precinct's interview room, Detective Ramirez across from her. Ramirez's dark uniform contrasted with the sterile fluorescent light and peeling paint. Annie slid a manila folder toward the detective, each page filled with notes, diagrams, and annotated timelines. Ramirez's lips pressed into a thin line as she studied the evidence in silence. Finally, Ramirez looked up and said, "I've reopened the case file and requested forensic reports on the car's remains." Annie's heart pounded at the news, hope and fear entwined in her chest. Ramirez continued, "We have faint tire tracks consistent with a 1970s model, but the riverbed silt hinders clear recovery." Annie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "What about the phone records?" she asked quietly. Ramirez tapped a digital tablet, displaying ancient logs scanned into the system. The detective sighed and said, "The Southern Exchange shows 2 calls to your home on October 12, 1978, both untraceable." Late afternoon sun slanted across the muddy riverbank as Annie approached the yellow police tape. Her beige trench coat flapped in the cool breeze, draping over her slender frame. The dark water rippled with each gust, reflecting gold and gray waves. 2 uniformed officers stood beside a partially submerged 1970s sedan, its roof caved and windows opaque with silt. Annie's breath caught as she locked eyes on the vehicle she hadn't seen since childhood nightmares. She knelt at the tape, placing her gloved hand on the cold metal barrier. The river's edge smelled of wet earth and decay, sending a shiver up her spine. A forensic technician leaned into the car, flashlight illuminating twisted upholstery and rust. Annie closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm here. I won't let you fade again." The river gurgled softly, carrying her words away into the dusk. Inside a temporary field lab trailer, Annie cradled a rusted car key fob recovered from the river crawl. The fob's metal casing was pitted with decades underwater, yet its buttons bore her mother's initials, faint but legible. Annie ran a finger along the raised letters, feeling an electric jolt of connection. Behind her, Ramirez examined waterlogged documents strapped to the wall by magnets. Annie's vision blurred with tears as she slid the fob into her palm, the weight of 46 years pressing down. "This changes everything," she whispered, voice trembling with awe and dread. Ramirez nodded, turning back to her notes. "It's proof they were here, where the case went cold." Annie inhaled deeply, chin rising with fierce determination. "I will finish what was started." The trailer door swung closed as evening fell, sealing her promise against the approaching night. Early in the state forensic lab, Annie Anderson hovered over a stainless steel bench as forensic technician Dana Matthews arranged waterlogged sediment slides under a bright microscope. Matthews' gloved finger tapped a dusty petri dish and she said, "These silt layers match the river site, but contamination renders definitive dating impossible." Annie's knuckles whitened under harsh fluorescent lights as frustration rolled through her like a storm surge. She pressed Dana for answers. "Can we isolate the call's timestamp or phone components from these fragments?" Her voice taut with urgency. Dana exhaled and replied, "We can attempt electrolysis to clean the contacts, but it risks further damage." Annie's heart pounded as she nodded, steeling herself for another setback, while vowing silently that no bureaucratic hurdle would extinguish her search. Back in the precinct hallway, Annie Anderson stormed beneath buzzing fluorescence toward Detective Ramirez's office door, each step echoing on the linoleum tile. She knocked sharply, then said when the door opened, "We need the excavation permit signed today, or the river site will be filled in before dawn." Ramirez, female, 48, folded her arms, brow furrowed, and replied, "The county prosecutor demands evidence beyond a rusty key fob and hearsay." Annie's chest tightened as she shot back, "You have call logs, tire tracks, and witness statements. This is far beyond hearsay." Ramirez exhaled and tapped her pen on a cluttered desk. "I'll try to expedite it." But the chain of command moves slow and politics are tangled. Annie closed her eyes briefly and whispered, "Then we'll cut through the red tape ourselves," determination igniting in her gaze as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Annie Anderson entered the aging telephone exchange archives, the brick-walled chamber illuminated by dusty midday sunlight, slanting through small high windows. She approached archivist Linda Chen, female 40, whose spectacles glinted as she pulled a leather-bound logbook from a tall metal shelf. Annie laid out her case file and asked, "These records should show if someone dialed out from my family's number that night. Do the microfilm scans include October 12, 1978? Chen's brow furrowed as she consulted faded index cards and murmured, "The system gap caused by equipment replacement erased many logs that evening." Annie's pulse quickened and she pressed on. "Is there any backup archive or third-party copy from the Southern Exchange?" she asked, voice wavering with both hope and dread. Chen hesitated, then slid a dusty cylinder past stacks of tapes and whispered, "There might be microfilm stored off-site. Requires special clearance. I can request tomorrow." Under a clouded moon, Annie Anderson approached the abandoned Southern Exchange building, its boarded windows and rusted sign almost swallowed by creeping ivy. Her trench coat collar turned up against a biting breeze as she stepped onto the cracked concrete walkway, each footstep echoing in the hush. She pressed her ear to the door and heard muffled voices arguing inside, two male tones and one female tone discussing movement and erasing traces. Annie drew a breath and tried a side window, its glass thick with grime. She traced a trembling fingertip through the dirt to clear a small circle and peered within. Inside, Dim lanterns cast jittery shadows on crates and machinery as the voices grew sharper, and she caught the word Anderson hissed in alarm. Fog curled around her ankles as she retreated into the night, determined to return with proof. Returning at dawn, Annie Anderson picked the lock on the rear entrance with trembling fingers and slipped into the dusty basement beneath the exchange. Musty air and swirls of cobwebs greeted her as she crouched low behind stacked wooden crates, her pulse hammering in her ears. Ahead she spotted three figures. A man, male 45, in a weathered leather jacket pacing, a woman, female 32, leaning against a steel column, and a man, male 38, clutching a dusty phone handset. They whispered heatedly about the Anderson transmissions and covering up the late-night calls, their words laced with malice. Annie pressed her back against a cold brick wall, her breath caught in her throat as she strained to hear every damning syllable. Dread coiled in her stomach as the voices stopped and footsteps drew inexorably closer from behind crates. Dawn broke over the sleepy town as Annie Anderson sat at her kitchen table, clutching a letter that had just arrived in the mail. The envelope, yellowed with age, bore no return address. Her hands trembled as she carefully unfolded the brittle paper inside. The letter revealed a startling truth. Someone close to the Anderson family had known more about their disappearance than anyone admitted. The handwriting was familiar, her estranged uncle's. It spoke cryptically of threats, secrets buried beneath lies, and a warning to stop digging or face consequences. Annie's eyes narrowed with disbelief and resolve. So it was never just an accident, she whispered. Her mind raced through decades of family memories, betrayal, and silence, now shattered by this grim revelation. Outside, the morning fog curled around the oak trees, thick and suffocating like the secrets that had haunted her family. Later that afternoon, Annie met with Detective Ramirez in a quiet coffee shop tucked away from prying eyes. Annie slid the letter across the table, her voice low but firm. This changes everything. Someone close was silenced to keep the truth hidden. Ramirez nodded gravely, eyes scanning the note's cryptic warnings. We'll reopen all family contacts and re-interview anyone connected to your uncle, she promised. But be careful. This kind of knowledge brings danger. Annie swallowed her fear and responded, I'm ready. After all these years, I can't turn back now. The sun streamed through the dusty window, casting long shadows across their determined faces. The bustling cafe around them faded into a quiet hum as the weight of their mission settled deep within. The next day, Annie found herself standing before the crumbling gravestone of her uncle in a neglected cemetery. Wildflowers tangled around the base, and moss crept across the faded inscription. She knelt, brushing away dirt and debris as memories flooded her. Why didn't you tell us? She whispered, voice breaking. A breeze rustled the dry leaves, carrying faint echoes of old family arguments and whispered threats. The unearthed letter now felt like a map, pointing to deeper wounds and unspoken betrayals, buried long ago. Annie touched the cold stone and vowed aloud, your silence won't be the end. I'll find out who wanted you gone. The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach for the secrets lying beneath the earth. As twilight settled, Annie sat alone in the dim glow of her attic office, the walls lined with decades of research and family photographs. She stared at a map spread across her desk, red pins marking locations tied to her family's last days. Suddenly, the phone rang, a piercing, unexpected sound in the quiet room. Her heart leapt as she answered, voice barely a whisper. Hello? A distorted voice, warped by static, breathed, stop looking, or suffer. The line went dead. Annie's hands shook, but her resolve only hardened. You won't scare me, she said through clenched teeth. Outside the night deepened, rain pattering against the window pane like a warning drumbeat, echoing her unyielding determination to uncover the truth. Midnight found Annie driving slowly down the winding country road that led to the river where her family's car was found. Mist clung to the trees and the headlights pierced through the dense fog, illuminating twisted branches like skeletal hands. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles pale. She muttered under her breath, this ends here. Pulling off near the riverbank, she stepped into the cold night air, the muddy ground crunching beneath her boots. The silhouette of the sunken car lay half swallowed by water and earth. Annie's breath steamed in the chill as she knelt beside it, tracing its rusty contours. Somewhere deep inside, a shattering truth waited to rise with the tide, ready to rewrite everything she thought she knew about her family's fate. Dawn broke over the riverbank as Annie Anderson stood beside Detective Ramirez, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air. Forensic divers waded into the murky water, their movements slow and deliberate, searching for hidden clues beneath decades of sediment. Annie's gaze remained fixed on the sunken car, its rusty frame barely visible beneath the water's surface. Ramirez spoke quietly. "This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Annie nodded, voice steady despite the storm inside. "After all this time, it's finally coming to light." The two women shared a determined look before turning to watch the divers continue their methodical search, hope mingling with the chill of the morning. Hours later inside the precinct, Annie and Ramirez pored over newly recovered evidence, a soaked diary with faded handwriting, a tarnished locket, and an old driver's license bearing George Anderson's name. Annie's fingers trembled as she traced the locket's intricate engravings, a sudden flood of memories washing over her. Ramirez examined the diary's pages under bright desk lamps, reading aloud fragments of entries filled with fear and coded messages. "It's a confession," Ramirez said, eyes wide. Annie swallowed hard, voice thick. "They tried to protect us, but the danger was closer than we thought." The room filled with a charged silence, the weight of hidden truths pressing heavily on both women. Late afternoon found Annie standing before her childhood home, now shuttered and overgrown with ivy. The windows reflected the fading sun as she reached for the rusted key she'd found in the river. With a deep breath, she turned the lock and pushed open the creaking door. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of golden light, filtering through stained curtains. Memories flooded back, the laughter, the whispers, the silences. Annie walked slowly through empty rooms, her fingers grazing cracked wallpaper and worn furniture. In the living room, she found a hidden drawer beneath the floorboards, containing faded photographs and a small sealed envelope addressed to her. Her heart pounded as she unfolded the fragile paper, anticipation and dread swirling inside. In the quiet of her attic office that evening, Annie spread the photographs and letter on her desk under the glow of a single desk lamp. Each image revealed fragments of a forgotten past, smiles frozen in time, shadows lurking just out of frame. She carefully opened the sealed envelope and found a map marked with strange symbols, and a note in her uncle's handwriting. "Follow the path, but beware those who watch." A chill ran down her spine. Annie whispered, "This is more than a family secret. It's a warning." Determined, she gathered her things and prepared for a journey that would unravel decades of silence and deception, stepping deeper into the unknown with every breath. Under a cold moon, Annie drove down a narrow forest road toward a remote cabin marked on the map. The trees loomed like silent sentinels as mist curled around her headlights. Her pulse raced as she approached the weathered wooden door, its paint peeling and hinges creaking. She knocked firmly, heart hammering. The door slowly opened to reveal a gaunt man with sharp eyes and a guarded expression. "I've been expecting you," he said quietly. Annie steadied her voice. "I need answers about my family." The man's gaze softened slightly. "Then prepare yourself. The truth will change everything." The night swallowed them both as the cabin's threshold became the gateway to the final revelations. Inside the dimly lit cabin, the gaunt man, Nathan, revealed years of buried secrets. His voice was heavy with regret as he described how powerful figures silenced the Andersons to hide a dark conspiracy. Annie sat motionless, absorbing every word. "Your family never left by choice," Nathan said. "They were forced into hiding, trapped by threats and lies." Annie's fingers clenched the worn armrest, disbelief and sorrow mingling. "Why now?" she asked, voice trembling. Nathan's eyes darkened. "Because the truth is unraveling, and those who buried it fear exposure." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the cabin windows like ghosts warning of what was to come. Nathan handed Annie a faded journal, its leather cover cracked and soft. "This belonged to your father," he said quietly. Annie opened it with reverence, pages filled with coded messages, names, and cryptic warnings. As she read, memories of the last family dinner flashed in her mind. The phone call, the fear, the silence. "They were fighting something bigger," she whispered. Nathan nodded grimly. "The deeper you go, the darker it gets." Annie's resolve hardened. "I'll finish their fight," she vowed. The cabin's shadows seemed to grow longer, swallowing the past and illuminating the dangerous path ahead. Back at the police precinct, Annie and Detective Ramirez confronted the lead investigator behind the original disappearance case. The man, now retired, wore a weary expression, shadows creasing his face. "I was ordered to bury the truth," he confessed. "There were threats from above, political pressure to close the case." Annie's voice cracked. "How could you let them suffer in silence?" He looked down, ashamed. "Fear and power silenced me, but your persistence has forced a reckoning." Ramirez stepped forward. "We're reopening everything. This time, justice will be served." The weight of decades of silence hung heavy in the room as the past and present collided. In the fading light of a rainy evening, Annie returned to the riverbank with a small team of forensic experts. The water churned darkly as they began careful excavation of debris around the sunken car. Annie stood nearby, rain dripping from her hood, heart pounding as each new fragment surfaced. "This confirms it," one expert said, holding up a family ring corroded by time. Annie closed her eyes, imagining her family's last moments. The fear, the hope, the silence. "They deserve to be remembered," she whispered. The rain intensified, washing away decades of secrets and cleansing the sorrow etched into the river's depth. Months later, in a solemn courtroom filled with muted murmurs and flashing cameras, Annie stood before a judge as charges were finally brought against those responsible for the Anderson family's disappearance. Her voice was steady but emotional as she recounted the decades of silence and pain. "We demand justice," she declared. Outside, supporters held candles, their light flickering against the night sky. Though the scars of loss remained, a fragile hope blossomed, a promise that truth and memory would prevail. As the gavel struck, Annie's eyes met Ramirez's, both women sharing a silent vow to never forget. The long journey toward healing had begun, scarred but unbroken. A year after the trial, Annie Anderson stood quietly at the edge of the riverbank, where the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the water's surface. She released a small bouquet of wildflowers, watching them float gently away. "For Mom, Dad, and Annie," she whispered, voice soft but steady. The breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and distant memories. Though justice had been served, the void left by loss lingered, a reminder of pain never fully healed. Annie's gaze lifted toward the horizon, a fragile hope mingling with sorrow. The river's gentle current whispered promises of peace, yet her heart remained tethered to the past's silent echoes. In her modest living room, Annie carefully placed framed photographs of her family on a newly polished wooden mantelpiece. The images captured smiles, laughter, and moments frozen in happier times. She traced the edges of a photo with her fingertips, murmuring, "You're not forgotten." A soft breeze stirred the curtains as evening shadows deepened, bathing the room in muted hues. Annie sat back in her chair, the weight of years pressing down yet lightened by the act of remembrance. Each photograph was a testament to resilience, a chapter closed yet forever cherished. The quiet space held a sacred peace that words could never fully express. At a local community center, Annie addressed a small crowd gathered for a memorial dedicated to missing persons. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of loss and the strength of survival. "We honor those lost, not as shadows, but as light in our lives," she said. Faces in the crowd reflected grief, hope, and unity. Flowers and candles flickered softly on the podium. Annie's words wove a tapestry of remembrance and resilience, inspiring others to keep searching, keep believing. The room pulsed with quiet determination, a shared promise that no one's story would ever be forgotten. Alone in her attic office, Annie opened a dusty box containing letters, mementos, and a folded map marking distant places she'd yet to explore. A soft smile touched her lips as she traced a path on the paper, dreams rekindled despite scars left by the past. "The journey continues," she whispered. The room was bathed in morning light filtering through the window, dust particles dancing in the air. Memories, pain, and hope mingled in this quiet sanctuary. Annie rose, determination steady, ready to embrace whatever awaited beyond the next horizon, her family's legacy guiding every step. The final scene fades to a quiet lakeside at twilight, ripples reflecting fading light as a single rowboat drifts gently. Annie's voice echoes softly. "Some truths are buried, but love and memory surface like the tide, always returning, always enduring. What mysteries remain hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the next seeker?" The story closes not with answers, but with an invitation to remember, to seek, and to never forget.